Okay, so welcome everybody to our final talk of the Dinghy Show with Oliver Shaw on cruising. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vanessa Devereux. I'm the Championship Coordinator. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping. Can we ask you all to mute your microphones during the talk and use the chat option if you would like to post a question. The talk will be recorded and will go up onto our website for you to come back and check the information that's given. So without further delay, I'll hand over to Oliver and we can start this talk.
Thank you very much. And I'm Oliver Shaw. I've been sailing most of my life, and both dinghies and cruising yachts. So welcome everybody. I'm going to be talking about primarily day cruising in the GP14. There are people who wish to cruise a little bit further than you can go in a day sail, and the boat will carry camping kit. And if you think in terms of backpacking, the kit you can carry in a boat is generous. There are a few hardy people who have even been known to camp aboard the boat. But I must say she's somewhat cramped for that. But primarily, most people who cruise in GP14s day cruise. She's a true general purpose boat. And although it's a little uncertain whether it was part of the original design brief, the chap who commissioned the design, Group Captain Haylock, then editor of Yachting World, writing 25 years later, said his vision was for a boat that you could use to take the family picnicking on Saturday and that dad and perhaps mum could race on the Sunday. She's arguably, and in my view, one of only two world-class cruiser racer dinghies, the other one being the Wayfarer, which is a much larger and heavier boat. Above all, she's a superb seaboat for her size. And if we just pause a moment, I'm going to share the screen. Now, can we get that onto full screen? Yes, I think we can. And the description of the talk refers to British waterways and coast.
You sure you want to have a
Yeah,
I think we're an upset Anne on our hands, but there we go.
Could we suggest that people mute, please?
Just you know, not really making yourself available. When I first came on, her name was.
I'm getting somebody else coming through. I'm very much a coastal and estuary sailor, so I'm used to waves, I'm used to tides, and I expect reasonably predictable winds. It's always a culture shock on the rare occasions when I sail inland waterways, delightful though some of them are, to find flat water, even when it's blowing, but seriously big wind shifts and no tides. So 4 areas that I'm going to be talking about: Class Association Cruising Weeks, which are our headline cruising event as an association, other organised cruising events, independent cruising, which is very much part of the original design brief, and a new development, cruiser training. So the Association Cruising Weeks, headline event each year. We run them most years. 2020 was obviously an exception. Characterized by excellent sailing and convivial socializing, often in superb scenery. Sometimes we share the venue and the social program with the national championship, or if it happens to be in this country, the World's Championship. But not all championship venues lend themselves to cruising. So some years we do share and some years we do our own thing. That montage of photographs shows some of the sailing and some of the socializing. Two of the places we've been to more than once have been Poole Harbour, at least twice during my time with the cruising fleet in the association, and Milford Haven, where we've been 3 times. And those photographs show an occasion when we went to the east side of Anglesey doing our own thing. I don't know where the major championship was that year, but we decided that we preferred to do our own thing. I was a member at the time of a club on the east side of Anglesey at Trefbuchan, Red Wharf Bay Sailing Club. And these 3 photographs show, amongst other things, some of the superb scenery, father and teenage daughter sailing, and alternative propulsion. Oars are very useful on a cruising boat, and not only when one is coming ashore, having sailed to a venue and then dropped sail shortly before reaching the shore. Also useful if the wind drops. Another shot from the same year, one of my all-time favourite coves, Porth Elian, just to the west of Linus Peninsula on Anglesey. And again, you see the superb scenery. 2 shots from one of our Milford Haven cruising weeks. I think these were 2011. We'd sailed down to Dale at the mouth of the Haven, and these shots coming back up through the tanker port. Most of the waterway is within the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, the tanker port being the exception, but even the tanker port is interesting. Top left is the last time we were in Milford Haven. This time we were based at Loreni, well up the haven in the wooded area. And on our final day, we'd sailed down the estuary to a waterside pub called the Jolly Sailor at Burton. And you see us there mooring the boats to the pontoon before going ashore to the pub for lunch. The boat in the foreground is my bigger boat, a Privateer 20 gaff cutter, which we were using as mothership for the cruising week. The social side is always very important, and we always feature an annual cruiser dinner at either a pub or a restaurant, some suitable local hostelry. We're no stranger to pub lunches, and bottom left, a beach barbecue on one of the beaches in Poole Harbour, and a skipper there showing initiative in keeping his beer cool. We're very inclusive. We have families sailing with parents and children. We have on occasion all female boats, and we have teenagers, albeit that the young lady concerned in this photograph is no longer a teenager. She's now a married woman and a paramedic, as is her husband. She happens to be the daughter of my oldest sailing friend, and Richard and I go back 52 years in boats. We have people sailing with their dogs, Jester the Jack Russell, Jet the Labrador puppy, and we have members who, on walks ashore, get up close and personal with the local wildlife. And we even have the occasional retired pensioner single-handing, and on this occasion, pulling down reefs or shaking them out as conditions changed. Yours truly. Other cruising events, apart from the National Cruising Week, come into 2 categories. Some are run by the Class Association, and some are run by clubs with an invitation to the association. These photographs show an event that we ran as an association on Ullswater a few years ago. arguably the most attractive, most scenic of all the English lakes. Top right and bottom left, more photos from the Ullswater week. Ullswater event. It wasn't a week, it was 3 days. Top left was a 60th anniversary vintage boat rally. Apologies for the topper and the modern GP that are photobombed us. Ignore those. All the others are sale numbers in either 1 or 2 digits. The oldest sale number there, number 2, a boat that is now in the custodianship of the Class Association. I think most of us with vintage boats regard ourselves as custodians rather than owners. And she's recently been restored. Sale number 64 is one of my boats, the youngest boat in this photograph, but even so dating from 1951. And, dare I say, very period correct, cotton sails. Bottom right, I've included this photograph because of the gentleman on the right, the late Searson Thompson, who was, I think, a founder member of the association, certainly very prominent in the life of the association for most of its existence. He was a senior person on the staff of Bell Woodworking, who built the first commercially produced GP14 and built for many years the kits from which a lot of amateurs built the boats. He ended up as managing director and owner of the company and took a lifelong interest in the Class Association. Photographed there in 2010, he was then, I think, 98 and still going strong. Died a few years ago, but he doesn't look 98 in that photograph. Elderly, yes. Other cruising events run by individual clubs with an invitation to the Class Association. Liverpool Sailing Club, top right, an upriver cruise to the Runcorn Bridge and back. That's passing Widnes Church, I think. Top left, a weekend at Abersoch, camping and cruising weekend, run by an inland club, Toddbrook Sailing Club. Ivan Washington, at the time, was cruising rep of the Class Association, and he ran the event for Toddbrook and invited the Class Association. 2 on the bottom, Redhawk Bay Sailing Club ran an annual cruising week. Well, I say annual, it ran for a couple of years at my instigation, and I was a member at the time. And on this occasion, we sailed along the coast to the neighbouring large bay, Shrivecock, up the bay, in for a quick drink at the pub, but it had to be quick because the bay is very tidal and we didn't want to get caught when the tide ran out. Another shot of Abersoch. Some of our boats on cruising events are seriously old vintage boats. This one, number 28, and I know Stuart, our owner, is with us on this talk, photographed at the Abersoch cruising, Abersoch Vintage Rally. This boat, top left, my one, 1 year old at the time. So 1 year old, 60 years old at the time, date of the photograph, and she's still going strong. Top right, we have Ian and Jamie McCulloch with Jester the Jack Russell. And Ian was relatively new to radio communications, had just bought his first handheld set, bottom left, briefing on radio protocols, what channels to use, and making sure that he knows what all the buttons do. Independent cruising, very much within the remit of what the boat was designed for. And I apologize that all the independent cruising ones are my boat, spanning about 45 years. This was my top left, was my first ever GP14, celebrating my first paycheck as a newly qualified schoolmaster bought a half share in her from a friend, very good friend, who was also a holiday employer. He ran a youth sailing school in Milford Haven, and I was on his permanent staff. And sold me a half share when I was looking for a boat and was only just straight out of university. 12 months later, when I was able to buy my own GP14 outright, he bought my half share back again. An older friend, very, very generously helping a younger friend to get his first foot on the ladder. A glorious anchorage on the west side of Anglesey, top right, and on Windermere, bottom right, and bottom left, radio call, liaison call with the Coast Guard. 3 more shots from the east side of Anglesey, independent cruising there. And we have top right, west side of Anglesey, sailing down the coast towards Llandwyn Island, that smudge on the horizon, and just visible under the sail, little white dot, Llandwyn Lighthouse. Top left, sailing in Holy Island Sound, Northumberland, on the occasion of the Dinghy Cruising Association rally at Holy Island in 2010. Bottom right, a very secluded estuary on the east side of Anglesey with a horrendously difficult entrance. The only people you'll see there at low water will be the occasional walker, the occasional bird watcher, the occasional photographer, the occasional angler. High water, you'll occasionally see 1 or 2 kayakers, and once in a blue moon, you'll see a sailing boat. And if you see a sailing boat, there's a good chance I'm on the tiller. Wildlife. One spectacular memory is the occasion when, with a friend, we cruised from Trithbuchan round Mulberry Island along the coast to Lligwydd. Went ashore for a picnic lunch. Wine with you, sir? And then headed off back, by which time the wind had freshened. It was blowing about force 5 as we left Lligwydd. My crew described himself as an apprentice novice, inexperienced, very keen, but I wasn't prepared to take any chances. And by the time we got to the island here, it was blowing about force 6. I'd pulled the first reef down before we set off. I pulled the second reef down as we approached the island, and then warship the long way round, what is sometimes described as grannying the turn, bore off onto a great screaming plane, get the cursor back, all the way to Trithbuchan. And we had a close escort of a school of dolphins, close enough to almost reach out and touch them. So close that I was concerned whether we would hit one of them. But Russ commented, "Don't worry, they are masters of the sea. They will keep clear of us." And they did, just keep clear. We were going at their speed, so we attracted them. Very different wildlife, very different sail. 12 months later, in the same waters, out here, we found ourselves in a small pod of minke whales. Now, I wouldn't identify a minke whale from any other cetacean of similar size, but our companion boat, the one with Jester the Jack Russell, Ian McCulloch was a fisheries officer, and he did identify them as minke whales. So I'm quite prepared to believe that's what they were. Most people sailing, cruising in GPs, sail relatively short, albeit very interesting, coastal passages. But some people have sailed serious open sea passages. And here's just some of them. Cardiff to Newquay via St. David's Head. I know part of that passage. I've sailed 2 different parts of it in yachts. From Cardiff, you head down the Bristol Channel all the way until you get to St Gowan's Head, along the coast, past Milford Haven, through the infamous Jack Sound, across St Bride's Bay, out to St David's Head, and then round the corner to Newquay. Very, very challenging waters in places. And it was that sail by a chap called Roger Seal, if I remember correctly. I think I've got the name wrong. Roger somebody. It was that sail that persuaded people in the very early years of the class that the GP14 was not a floating coffin, as they thought, and was a first-class seaboat. Southend to Calais and Dover to Ostend, both of them single-handed, and others. Solent to Barfleur, for example. Several crossings of the Irish Sea, including, rumour has it, competitors in championships in Dublin sailed across the head to take the ferry.
Talkable, or is it?
Sorry?
And talkative, and yeah.
And
are you out somewhere? Or?
And Stuart Elder, who's with us during this talk, recently sailed the full length of the Great Glen, and may perhaps tell us about that afterwards. Enjoyable as independent cruising is, we also warmly encourage you to join us as an association cruising in a group. That involves sailing, socializing with friends, and attractive scenery. So, as they say, what's not to like? Cruiser training is a new development and was recently described to me by our training officer as a bit like day skipper for dinghies. 4 photographs there showing shore drills. The top 2, reefing technique. The bottom 2, the use of a fixed shock cord as a tiller brake. Very useful to be able to put a brake on the tiller so that the tiller will hold itself while you do other things like checking your navigation, taking photographs, reefing the boat, dealing with the anchor warp, or whatever. A very useful technique. That's just for fun, because my other boat is a gaff cutter and I like gaff cutters. That's my modern GP with a Photoshop rig off a 40-footer. Cruising or racing, they can overlap in 2 senses. Many people, myself included for much of my life, do both. And I personally reckon that I learned most of my boat speed skills and much of my boat handling from racing and most of my seamanship from cruising. And the classic definition of a yacht race is any 2 sailing boats in sight of each other. So, forthcoming events for this year has got to be COVID permitting, but at the moment it's looking very promising. The National Cruising Week, end of July in Falmouth, and the Advanced Cruiser Training Course, mid-July at my home club on the Mersey, Liverpool Sailing Club, intensely tidal waters. There's the email address for inquiries or via the website cruising@gp14.org. Looking ahead to next year, Cruising Week will be late July. That time of year is fixed by my professional commitments, which tend to end early July, and I want to fit it in between then and my annual yacht cruise. And we're considering the Norfolk Broads. A reminder of the email address for inquiries. So thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you on the water, I hope, and open for any questions.
We've got one chat from Curly saying Simon, Ralph and I sailed Port Patrick to Larne along with 3 other boats from Bolton as a fundraiser for the RNLI on way to taking part in the Irish GP14's champ at East Antrim Boat Club in 1976. That's the only question I've got, unless anybody would like to unmute themselves and ask Oliver a question.
And thank you for that, Curly.
Ask a question.
Go on, Rob.
Cheers. Rob Bailey, I think we've communicated via email, Oliver. Obviously the boat side is interesting, but the Falmouth, what's the accommodation side? Is that camping? Is it?
Traditionally, we leave that to individuals because some people like to go for bed and breakfast. Some people like to take a caravan down and a boat. That does mean either a triple journey at each end or 2 cars and 2 drivers. Some people like to camp. Very occasionally, people have friends or family in the area. But I am optimistic that if requested, we can put you in touch with campsites or with other accommodation. The host on this occasion is Richard Moore, my oldest sailing friend, who is a rear commodore of the host club and lives locally. And I'm quite sure that he can assist with finding accommodation if required.
Okay, I was only conscious that given COVID year and everybody will be out of COVID in early June, there might be a lot of people trying to do staycations in the UK, and therefore accommodation might be a premium. But no.
Yes, I've heard from one person already that he definitely wishes to come and has booked accommodation. I presume that accommodation is still relatively easily found if one is quick off the mark. But I confess I haven't tried, and I am tacitly assuming, Richard doesn't yet know, but I'm tacitly assuming that that I will put up with him.
Okay. An email.
Can I just come in here? Somebody's just asking about sleeping on a GP14. When I did the Caledonian Canal, we actually sailed out the Moray Firth to Cromarty, which is quite an incredible place. Overnight, it was very, very stormy. And for the week, we had a guy who slept on his GP14. We had a tent and just threw it on the shore and pulled the boats up, which is an advantage the GP's got over a wayfarer. But my abiding memory is that this chap tied his GP to a buoy that would have held a super tanker. But it was so stormy, his boat was bouncing up in the air, and we were so concerned about him, we actually went out to him and said, "Are you all right?" And we woke him up. So it is perfectly feasible if you've got very short legs to sleep on a GP14 in a storm.
Yeah. I think I can add a little to that. I've not done so in those conditions, but in calm conditions, I have twice slept aboard a GP. And with the Series 1, there is enough headroom just between floorboards and thwart to be able to sleep on the floorboards. With the Series 2, there is not. And what I used to do with the Series 2 was rig up a collapsible bed base, an IKEA bed base, not designed for that purpose at all, but supported on the outboard side by the side bench, and on the inboard side supported by the spinnaker pole lashed to the boom. Used that as a base, put an airbed on top of it, and then a tent over everything.
It's not just on the cruising fleet that people sleep in the boats. We've been to events and sat there in the morning to see some of the boats rocking, and then a head appears out from underneath the covers of a normal flat cover, not even a boom up cover. And I'm sure there was plenty of liquid encouragement to aid sleep that night.
Yes.
Oliver, could I ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
I've tried a couple of times on the chat, but it's not been spotted. do you have an automatic reefing mechanism for your jib sail?
I'm not quite clear what you mean by automatic reefing system. I have a roller.
That's what I mean, yes.
Yes, I have a roller reefing system. And I'm glad you raised this because there is a distinction between reefing and furling.
Right.
The important thing is whether you have a spar to maintain torsional rigidity between the bottom of the sail, the tack, and the top of the sail, the head. If you don't have a spar, then there is the risk that if it is reefed, the top will unroll, and that A, distorts the shape of the sail while you're sailing, which does nothing for efficiency, but B, may, I imagine, risk straining the sailcloth as well permanently. So furling systems which do not have a spar, to my mind, it should be all or nothing. Having said that, I have once been caught in more wind than I felt comfortable with, crewing a borrowed GP with roller furling, and I reefed it. But that was off the wind. I don't think I'd have liked to have sailed it reefed hard to windward, because that would have distorted the genoa too much.
When you say spar, you mean a spar from the bow? What is a spar made of?
There are several proprietary brands of genoa reefing system. The best known one, I think, is the Helios system, sold under the name of flexible reefing spars. And they advertise, in fact, you've got the GP calendar. This month's photograph is Stuart Elder's boat and advertising flexible reefing spars. They advertise in mainsail as well. They've been around probably longer than any others, and their spar is, I think, alkathene water pipe, which is very rigid torsionally, but you can bend it into a complete circle if you want to. So it lends itself to use for a genoa reefing system, because you can furl up the sail and then take it off the boat and either bend it into a U and stow it in the boat when you put the cover on, or stow it in the back of the car. There's another firm called Aero Luff Spars, which I think, but I'm open to correction, also use a flexible spar. I've never come across this in the flesh, but I've heard of them. There's yet another firm called Bartels, which is a German firm that use an aluminium spar, which is therefore not flexible. So you've got to keep it straight when you take it off the boat. And the fourth one that I know about, and I've got a feeling there is one other, which I've forgotten. The fourth one I know about used to be produced by Holt Allen, known as the Holt Mini Reef. And I've actually got that fitting on my gaff cutter for the jib, but is now discontinued, so it's only available second-hand.
Thank you, Oliver.
Oliver, it's Tony Brevner here. I think the one you're missing is the Edge sail design, which uses two battens in the front of the sail to stiffen it up for reefing.
I think I had forgotten that one. I think there is another one that uses a spar, but yes, Edge sails, and I met that for the first and only time at the cruiser training course in 2019. And that seemed to work very well in the light conditions that we had on that occasion. I've no idea how well it works in strenuous conditions. I will say, for the Helios system, which is the one that I've used for many years, I have personally survived a force 8 off a major Anglesey headland using that system. It works.
I can jump in briefly. I have an Arrow Luff spar on my GP, so I have some
Oh, yeah.
familiarity with it. It's a brilliant piece of kit. It's nowhere near as flexible as the Hellier spar, so there are certain things you can't do with it that you can do with the Hellier spar. But one advantage is that it's carbon fiber. It's extremely rigid torsionally, and it's very small. It's about the diameter of a pencil. And so it presents a much finer entry for the head sail than the Hellier spar does. For this reason, a lot of racers, particularly Wayfarer class racers and so on, use it actually during racing. So it's an interesting beast, but it will not fold up in the tight circle that the Hellier spar will. And so it does reduce the choices you have in terms of storing it.
Thank you for that. And two points you remind me of in saying that. One, the Hellier system, now there are two versions. Mark 1 is designed to go with an existing Genoa, and the spar is slit down its length and fits over the sail. Mark 2 is intended for use with either a modified Genoa or with a brand new Genoa made for it, where the spar has no slits down it. The luff wire is fabricated inside the spar, and then the Genoa has a special large diameter luff pocket which slides over the assembled spar. Two very different systems, and the Mark IIs, to my mind, is the neater and more aerodynamic of the two. But the other thing, Bruce, I'm glad you came in, because in your talk, you mentioned briefly modifications for cruising. And I developed a number when I had my modern GP14 built for me by Tim Harper. And I know Stuart Elder has, not for Aeolian, but for Kyle Lee, has had installed some stowage for her. But for a cappella, my modern GP, I went for wider than standard side benches, just a single slat, but wider than standard for greater seating comfort. Obviously, a first-class reefing system, not only for the Genoa, but slab reefing for the main, so that I can pull down reefs quickly and reliably, and above all safely, under any conditions at sea. Seriously large hatches for the forward buoyancy tank, so that I can use them as access hatches for stowing things like the fenders and so on inside the buoyancy tank. Oars as alternative propulsion. What else did we do? Oh, I slightly simplified the rig. She had a modern race-derived rig, but Genoa tension or rig tension was by a mussel box cleated off at the mast. So the number of lines coming into the cockpit was limited. The kicker was led by the usual modern system, led to the thwart. But that was the only line led to the thwart. The Cunningham, which I rarely use in effect, was cleated off at the mast as well. The tiller brake that you saw on the photograph, and I created stowage space under the stern deck by a simple barrier across, fabric barrier, secured by shock cords. I had shock cord attachment, sorry, not shock cord, I had lanyard attachment points in the form of stainless steel eyes under the cockpit coaming all the way around the boat. And every loose piece of kit had a lanyard on it and a stainless steel carbine hook at the end, which just clipped on. And so in the unfortunate event of a capsize, nothing would get lost. I actually managed to capsize the boat twice in 10 years. neither of which should have happened.
No.
It's a dictum that you never, under any circumstances, in a dinghy or unballasted boat, never cleat the main sheet. Both capsizes were when I couldn't get the main sheet out of the cleat fast enough. And I think that's about it for the, one important modification for cruising. I also carried masthead buoyancy. The sausage-shaped 9-litre float on a halyard system so that I could take it down when I came ashore. The first year I had it, I left it up permanently, and by the end of the year it was porous. So the replacement came down every time I came ashore. Something like 15 years later, that float is still good. So that was my modifications for cruising.
Thank you, Oliver. Apologies to Peter for missing his question. The only other question I can see on chat is from Jill Best and asks, how tall are you, Oliver, for sleeping in the boat?
How tall am I?
Yep.
About 5'10".
Thank you. Has anybody got any other questions they'd like to pose to Oliver on any aspect of cruising?
Just one, probably just to finish off, and that's just, and it's really for Curly as well. The fact that I think this year is going to be a big year for dinghy cruising. I think this horrible word of staycation means that people are going to look for entertainment for their families, and dinghy cruising fits the bill both budget-wise and in excitement. And I really do think that's got a good future.
Thank you for that.
I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of sailing done, very much at clubs, but the idea of going somewhere and cruising, I think, is going to appeal to quite a few people as well. Let's just hope they do it safely.
And finally, if the questions have died out, a plug for the association cruising events, even though partly because of COVID and partly because we really need people other than myself, or in addition to myself, to volunteer to organise things. But a plug for the association cruising week, and a plug for the advanced cruiser skills training course, which really is an advanced course.
Okay, thank you very much, Oliver. And that's the end of our last talk for this year's Dinghy Show. All of our talks will be going up on our website and the association YouTube channel in the near future. So if there's anything you wish to check, or you missed any of our 7 talks, they will be there for you. And